is completely dark, and the house is completely quiet. The clock on the nightstand reads 3:14. He was not dreaming anything disturbing. He does not need the bathroom. He is not too hot or too cold. He is simply awake, alert in a way that feels wrong for the middle of the night, his mind already beginning to move through the day ahead without his permission. This is the third morning this week. He lies there for an hour before sleep returns. He has started to dread going to bed. Waking at 3 in the morning and being unable to return to sleep quickly is one of the most common sleep complaints in adults over 60, and one of the least satisfactorily addressed. Most people are told it is a normal part of aging, or advised about sleep hygiene, no screens before bed, cooler room, consistent schedule, and sent on their way. That advice is not wrong, but it addresses the surface of a problem that often has a specific physiological or metabolic cause operating underneath. Understanding why the body wakes at 3 rather than at midnight or at 5 is the key to addressing it in a way that actually changes the pattern. And that understanding is the conversation most appointments simply do not have time for. My name is Dr. Evan Noris. I am an internal medicine physician with 21 years of clinical experience, with a particular focus on sleep health and its intersection with metabolic and hormonal function in adults over 60. What motivated this video is the number of patients who had been living with this pattern for years, accepting it as inevitable when the cause was identifiable and in many cases correctable. After 60, the sleep architecture, the internal structure of a night's sleep, changes in ways that make early morning waking more likely. The proportion of deep, slow-wave sleep decreases. The proportion of lighter REM sleep increases, particularly in the second half of the night, which is the window from roughly 1 to 5 in the morning. Light sleep is inherently more disrupted by internal signals, a blood sugar fluctuation, a cortisol shift, a temperature change, a hormonal fluctuation, than deep sleep is. Think of deep sleep as a thick, insulating layer that muffles the body's internal signals, and light sleep as a much thinner layer through which those signals travel easily. After 60, the insulation thins. What that means in practice is that physiological events that would not have woken you at 40, a mild cortisol rise, a small drop in blood glucose, a slight surge of adrenaline, now surface into consciousness in the early hours. The 3 a.m. waking is rarely random. It tends to reflect a specific biological event timed to that window, and identifying which one is operating is the beginning of changing it. Before I walk through the 5 most common causes I see in clinical practice, I want to ask you something. How long has the 3 a.m. waking been happening for you? Weeks, months, or years? Just type your answer in the comments. Understanding how long this pattern has been established helps me shape what follows. The first and most physiologically specific cause of 3 a.m. waking is a nocturnal blood sugar drop, a mild hypoglycemic event in which blood glucose falls low enough to trigger a stress hormone response that pulls the person out of sleep. The liver releases stored glucose through a process called glycogenolysis overnight to maintain blood sugar during the fasting window of sleep. After 60, this process becomes less precisely regulated, particularly in people with prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, or even elevated insulin sensitivity from weight loss or dietary change. When the liver's overnight glucose release undershoots, blood sugar drops in the early morning hours, typically between 2 and 4 in the morning, and the body responds by releasing cortisol and adrenaline to correct it. These hormones are alert signals. They do their job efficiently. They wake you up. The waking often comes with a vague sense of anxiety, mild hunger, or heart pounding, even though nothing emotionally distressing has occurred. A woman named Mirella, a former actuarial analyst who had managed type 2 diabetes with meticulous discipline for 7 years, and who kept detailed logs of everything she consumed and every reading she took, came to see me after developing a pattern of waking at 3:15 almost exactly, with her heart beating faster than seemed appropriate for rest. Her overnight glucose data, once we added a continuous monitor, showed a consistent drop in the 2 to 3 a.m. window. Adjusting the timing and composition of her evening meal, adding a small amount of slow-digesting protein and fat before bed, stabilized her overnight glucose and eliminated the waking within 2 weeks. The practical fix: if you wake at 3 a.m. with any sense of anxiety, heart racing, or mild hunger, discuss nocturnal glucose monitoring with your doctor. A small pre-bedtime snack of protein and fat, A few nuts, a small amount of cheese, a spoonful of nut butter, can stabilize overnight glucose for people prone to this pattern. The second cause is the natural cortisol rhythm, and specifically the fact that cortisol, the body's primary waking hormone, begins rising between 2 and 4 in the morning as part of the biological preparation for the day. In younger adults, this rise is gradual enough that it does not surface into consciousness during normal sleep. After 60, for reasons that involve both the thinning of deep sleep architecture and age-related changes in the sensitivity of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, this natural cortisol rise can be steep enough to act as an internal alarm. People with elevated baseline stress, chronic worry, unresolved emotional burden, or any condition that keeps the stress response in a heightened state experience a more pronounced cortisol awakening signal in these early morning hours. The waking tends to be immediate and alert rather than groggy, and the mind begins working almost at once, which is the cortisol doing its intended job of orienting and preparing for the day. A man named Crispin, a former air traffic controller who had retired 3 years earlier, and who had assumed that retirement would resolve the sleep difficulties that had plagued his working years, came to see me finding instead that the 3 a.m. waking had intensified. His daytime cortisol pattern, when measured, was dysregulated, peaking too early and remaining elevated into the evening rather than declining as it should. We worked on evening wind-down practices and addressed the persistent low-grade worry that had not resolved with retirement, in combination with his physician's guidance. The waking became less consistent within 6 weeks. The practical fix: if you wake alert and with a racing mind at 3 a.m., keep a brief notebook by your bed to offload the thoughts that arrive. Write down whatever the mind brings, to-do items, worries, decisions, and tell yourself it is recorded and does not need to be held. This simple act reduces the cortisol-driven mental activation enough that many people can return to sleep within 20 to 30 minutes. The third cause involves the liver, specifically the liver's role in blood sugar regulation overnight, and a less commonly known connection to sleep disruption through what traditional Chinese medicine identified centuries ago, and what Western hepatology now recognizes as hepatic circadian dysfunction. The liver operates on a strong circadian rhythm, with peak metabolic activity occurring between 1 and 3 in the morning in its own biological schedule. In people with compromised liver function, including non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is extremely prevalent in adults over 60 and frequently undiagnosed, this peak metabolic activity can generate enough systemic metabolic signaling to disrupt sleep at exactly this window. The connection is not widely communicated, partly because the symptoms seem so remote from the organ, and partly because fatty liver disease itself is often asymptomatic until significant damage has occurred. A woman named Constance, a former landscape photographer who had spent decades traveling, and who described her 3 a.m. waking as having developed gradually over 2 years alongside unexplained fatigue, came to see me with no obvious sleep disorder on initial assessment. A comprehensive metabolic panel revealed elevated liver enzymes, and subsequent imaging confirmed moderate non-alcoholic fatty liver disease she had not known about. Addressing the underlying liver condition through dietary and lifestyle changes produced, among other improvements, a meaningful reduction in the 3 a.m. waking over the following 3 months. The practical fix: if your 3 a.m. waking is accompanied by any daytime fatigue, right-sided upper abdominal discomfort, or if you have risk factors for fatty liver, obesity, high triglycerides, metabolic syndrome, or diabetes, ask your doctor for a liver function panel and discuss whether imaging is warranted. If you are still with me and finding this useful, type the word awake in the comments right now. It tells me who is staying through the full conversation, and that matters. The fourth cause is one that many people are surprised to hear discussed in the context of sleep, and that is alcohol consumed in the evening, even in small amounts. Alcohol is a sedative that helps many people fall asleep more easily, which is precisely why it has been used as a sleep aid for centuries. But alcohol is metabolized by the liver over several hours, and as blood alcohol levels drop, typically in the 3 to 4 a.m. window for an evening drink, the brain rebounds from the sedated state into a state of heightened arousal. This rebound effect fragments sleep in the second half of the night, produces more vivid and disturbing dreams, and creates the specific pattern of falling asleep easily, but waking several hours later and being unable to return to sleep. After 60, alcohol metabolism slows, meaning the rebound effect arrives later and lasts longer. A man named Leopold, a former opera director who had maintained a lifelong habit of a glass of good wine before bed as part of an evening ritual he considered essential to his quality of life, came to see me after several months of 3 a.m. waking that had developed concurrently with a slight increase in his evening wine from 1 glass to 1.5. He was not drinking heavily by any conventional measure, but the additional half glass, in his 60s with slower alcohol metabolism, was shifting the rebound window precisely into the early morning hours. Returning to 1 smaller glass, consumed with dinner rather than immediately before bed, moved the rebound window outside his sleep period and eliminated the waking within 3 weeks. The practical fix: if you drink alcohol in the evening and wake at 3 a.m., experiment with eliminating or significantly reducing evening alcohol for 2 weeks and monitor whether the pattern changes. Track the results and bring them to your doctor. The 5th cause is the one that is least talked about in the context of early morning waking specifically, and it is hormonal. Primarily the decline of progesterone in women and testosterone in men that occurs through and after 60. Progesterone has a direct sleep-promoting effect. It acts on the GABA receptors in the brain, the same receptors targeted by many sedative medications, producing a calming, sleep-sustaining neurochemical environment. As progesterone declines through perimenopause and beyond, this natural GABA support diminishes, and the brain's ability to maintain the lighter stages of sleep in the early morning hours without surfacing into wakefulness is reduced. In men, declining testosterone is associated with increased nighttime cortisol relative to testosterone, shifting the hormonal balance toward alertness in the early morning hours. These hormonal contributions to sleep architecture are real, measurable, and increasingly recognized in sleep medicine, though they are rarely the first conversation a physician initiates. A woman named Vivian, a former marine biologist whose scientific training made her an unusually precise observer of her own physiology, came to see me having tracked her waking pattern against her menstrual cycle for 6 months before perimenopause had fully resolved. The 3 a.m. waking was consistently worse in the weeks of lowest progesterone. After menopause, the pattern became constant. A careful conversation about her options, including low-dose progesterone discussed with her gynecologist, produced meaningful improvement in sleep continuity. The practical fix: if you are a woman over 60 experiencing persistent early morning waking, raise the question of progesterone with your gynecologist or primary care physician. If you are a man, ask about testosterone levels in the context of your sleep quality. Hormonal contribution to sleep disruption is a legitimate and addressable medical conversation. Here is what I want you to do starting tonight. Before you go to sleep, eat a small protein and fat snack. If you are prone to early waking with anxiety or hunger, a few nuts, a small piece of cheese. Keep a notebook on your nightstand and commit to writing down whatever your mind brings when you wake, rather than holding it. Think honestly about your evening alcohol habit and whether a 2-week experiment without it is worth the information it would give you. And at your next appointment, ask your doctor about liver function, cortisol rhythm, overnight blood sugar, and hormonal levels. Whichever of these 5 causes resonated most with your own pattern. You do not need to raise all 5 at once. Raise the one that felt most like recognition. That is where to start. Everything I have shared today is a starting point for a conversation with your own physician, not a treatment plan. Your sleep pattern, your hormonal status, your metabolic history, and your medications all shape what is right for you specifically. Please bring this to your doctor. With the right information, many 3 a.m. waking patterns are genuinely improvable. And if understanding the hidden causes of early morning waking has you thinking about the broader effects of fragmented sleep on your health, the next topic I want to explore with you is how poor sleep quality in adults over 60 directly affects inflammation, immune function, and cardiovascular risk, and what you can do about it starting this week.